What's up, Auburn? Pastor Crespo here with Pastor Dustin Hall of the Try Jesus Auburn podcast. How are you, Pastor?
Good to be back in the studio.
That's right. It's been a little bit, right?
Been a while.
We've been actually doing having a life or
Remotely, yeah,
Yeah.
just busy.
I know you just finished a men's retreat weekend, right?
Yes.
You were the speaker for that.
Up in the Adirondacks. Yeah, it was called
Wow.
Casualties of War, and we talked about fighting these smaller battles that prepare us for our greater enemies.
That's awesome. I think at some point we need to, get a following here and invite them to follow us up there.
That'd be awesome.
For the weekend up
Beautiful
there. That's
place.
great. All right. Well, look, we are here again with a Q&A session, right? We have questions that have been submitted by some of our fellow Auburnites. Is that a word?
Sure.
Auburnites. Yeah. Okay. People that if you live in Auburn, congratulations, you're an Auburnite. But, we are specifically going over some of these questions and bringing them to you, Dustin, so that you can kind of, illuminate us with your answers. And that's a big word. My word a day calendar is working out, but you can share some answers with us, and of course, be a blessing and inspiration.
Sure.
So we have a question. The young man's name is Kevin. That's all I'll say. It's a quick one, so if you're watching or listening, you need to pay close attention because this goes by quick. But I think it'll lead to a good, healthy discussion. So you ready, Pastor?
Sure.
All right, here we go. All right, tell me your name, sir.
Kevin Williams.
Okay. Kevin, what's your question?
Why can't we all just get along? Why is it so hard for peace in this world?
Short question. I'm sure you have a very short answer for that, right?
No, well, I don't know. People have been asking that question for a long time.
That's right.
And those words, that's on our minds. Political season's upon us, and that's that same thing. Why can't we get along for the betterment of our country?
Oh, I know, and I think that's interesting. That question, especially at this time, with all the election stuff that's happening.
Yeah.
So what do you say? I mean, what do you have to say to Kevin today?
We're divided on so many different fronts too. Politics and race and immorality and all these things divide us in so many ways, in our worldview as well. So there's a verse in the Bible that when he asked this question immediately came to my mind. And if people have never read the book of Judges, check it out. It's an interesting book. It's full of everything. I mean, it's full of crazy, wild stuff.
Yeah.
It's full of heroes. So the story of Israel is basically that they follow God, God blesses them, and then all of a sudden they get too complacent and they're kind of self-serving and trusting in other gods and other kingdoms, and God allows them to go through a period of oppression to wake them up and bring them back to Him, and He'll raise up a hero in order to lead them back to prominence. But it keeps happening over and over and over and over again.
Judges is like a seesaw.
It is. Things go up and they're really good for a while, and then they crash, and then a hero comes along. Over and over again.
Yeah.
And the key to that book, and there's, again, some wild stuff in there. The key to that book is the very last verse. So if you want to understand why it's so wild and out there, it's the very last verse of the book of Judges. It's Judges 21:25, and it says this: "In those days there was no king in Israel, and every man or every person did that which was right in their own eyes."
Boy, that's that's deep. Actually, that's very deep. That's very deep.
Everybody was doing what they thought was right, and they weren't following the leadership of basically God is the message of the Bible. And I think we can really relate that to our time and our culture right now.
Yeah.
Everybody, and you can even be doing things that you think are good, but if they're misguided because you're not following God, you can be doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
Even out of a right mindset. So, really the big answer to this, the broad answer, and we'll get a little more specific here in a minute. The broad answer to this is, if we all really want to get along, we need to go to the author of life. We need to go to God and say, God, how are we supposed to live? What's life for? What is love? What is friendship?
Yeah.
What is right and wrong? What is moral? Because God designed life. And I think the problem is that so many of us have tried to kind of figure it out on our own, in our own way.
Yeah.
And that often conflicts with how somebody else is trying to figure it out in their own way.
Right.
And then we butt heads and have a hard time coming together.
Yeah. I think as I'm listening to you, I would encourage as well for our family, the Try Jesus family, to read the book of Judges, because
Mhm.
I don't know that it's as impactful until you see this is what happens when you do what you think is right, and this is what happens when you do what God says is right.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
Didn't say right too many times, but you get the point.
Well, and think about how dangerous this becomes, because we see this all the time.
Mhm.
You see somebody advocating for human rights, say, in this area, but then you look at their social media posts and their political positions or whatever it might be, and it seems to conflict with overall humanity or overall human rights.
Mhm.
So we as humans tend to pick and choose our own sort of pet projects or
Yeah.
pet ideologies, because we don't have the ability to see the big picture.
Right.
So we pick what's convenient or important to us, and sometimes we're even hypocritical because we're focusing on this area but neglecting that area,
Yeah.
or this area we feel strongly about, not realizing that there's this other area where we're hurting others. So we're this mixed bag as humans. And if we don't have God as the one to be correcting that,
Mhm.
or a higher authority. And let me just say this before we move on. This is also dangerous, because if there is no higher authority than us as humans, our own human hearts are the only thing that we have to rely on to tell us what is right and wrong. So
Right.
that's dangerous in and of itself. But if we as a society, as a people, don't believe there is a God, that means whoever is in power politically at the moment, or
Yeah.
world
Whoever has the
power,
most guns.
right, they get to tell you what is
Yeah.
right and wrong, and
Yeah.
you have to abide by that or face punishment.
Right.
So that becomes really dangerous when there is no higher authority than the human heart.
When this question was asked, I thought to myself, well, that's a very good question. I'm glad Dustin's going to answer it. And I think as you're making the point here, that the reason people can't get along because we all have a different standard that we're using to define what is good and
Mm-hmm.
whole and just.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes you have people with two different views and they oppose each other. So what's the solution? The solution is then to have we're not or we're never going to be able to get along,
Right.
because the only way is for us to have one source
Right.
of truth, one source of good.
Right. And transformation too, because we've been so far talking about good intentions,
Mm-hmm.
but if we're honest, we sometimes don't always have the best intentions, and that's sin.
Selfish.
That's
Yeah.
called sin. So not only are we confused as humans about
Yeah.
what's right and wrong, we also have this sin issue, this selfishness, this pride, this
Yeah.
self-serving issue in our hearts that prevents us from truly loving each other too. So we need the miracle of Jesus to transform our hearts into what he is, in that selfless love.
Wow.
So there's a story in the Bible that talks about human division too. It's a fascinating story. It comes early on, and it's in the book of Genesis, chapter 11.
You want me to bring that up?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the famous story of the Tower of Babel. There's a lot of spiritual things that we could connect into this, but as the Bible tells us, all the people in the world were in one place, and this was an issue. I'll talk a little bit in a second why that was an issue. But they're all in one place, and they say these words. Starting in verse 4. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. The Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, they all have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them." And then God confuses the language. He splits the people up into people that can communicate with each other. And supposedly this is what the scriptures are saying, how societies were formed and how different countries were formed and how different parts of the world were populated. Now, you might read that on the surface and say, well, God was being harsh to humanity. You know what I mean? Well, why did he split everybody up? It seemed good. They were all one, right? You got to read a little bit deeper, because there are three problems with the human race at this point, and it's right here in the verses. So the first one is in verse 4. It says, "Let us build ourselves a city and a tower." Okay, build ourselves. Later on, it says, "Let us make a name for ourselves." Let us make a name for ourselves. So the motivation for building this city and the tower was human pride. We're going to build this huge monument to how great we are. And they're not giving God any credit. God's going to help us. This is going to be great. This is going to be a place of unity and togetherness. This is going to be a monument to how great we are as beings.
I did not know that you were going to take this twist. So Kevin, if you're listening, hope you are. Dustin, what you just the reason for division, right, is because of selfishness, because we're all looking to a different king. But you just turned it around. I don't know if you have picked up on what he just did. I did, or maybe that division is not always a bad thing, because you could be part of a group that's making some really poor choices, right?
Right.
So you just kind of gave me a different perspective. You gave me a different perspective on the answer. I would not have necessarily gone in that direction.
There is definitely mob mentality and groupthink. You know, your worldview changes based on the people that are around you,
Right.
and you can think you're doing right because it pleases the friends or the group around you, and not even realizing that in the bigger picture you're actually wrong.
Right.
And that's
right.
a human.
Yeah.
That's a thing we have to deal with. So the first issue is pride. The second one says they're going to build this tower up into the heavens. Now, on a subtle reading, you may not understand what's going on there, but there's a reason why they say this. Because what has just happened a few chapters before this in the Bible is the flood, Noah's flood. And so they're saying that they want to build a tower up into the heavens because they don't believe God's promise when he said, "I'm never going to flood the earth again. I'll never do that again." So they build this tower up above what they perceive would be the highest of the flood waters. Right. So they think they're going to save themselves. So they don't believe God's promise. So the first issue is pride. The second issue is lack of faith. They don't believe God. They don't trust him. And then the third issue is disobedience. And the reason that it's disobedience is God said, look, populate the earth, spread out, enjoy all of creation. Go to the different corners, take your families and multiply and fill the earth. Right. And perhaps we'd all be speaking one language still had they done that. But they all wanted to stay together and not step out in faith. And so we have these three major problems. So people say God divided humanity, and I don't believe that's true. People were already divided. Have you ever been on a project, maybe at school or at work, where everybody thinks they're in charge?
Nope, never.
Everybody thinks they're in charge. And so it ends up nothing really gets done, right? And so what I always say about this story is that, as is with most of God's judgments, he only gives us what we already were or what we asked for. And so because they were in this for selfish reasons, because pride was the motivation, they weren't obeying God, they were already divided. And I wonder how far this building project actually got if everybody's in it for their own selfish motives. So they're already divided. And what's interesting about this story also is that the Tower of Babel, and the word Babel is an interesting word. The original Hebrew word is the root for confusion. And so this story is about confusion. So if we look at the moral or the theme or the message behind this story is pride, selfishness, and disobedience brings confusion among the human race. And I think if there was one thing that we could point to, other than just sin and evil, it's confusion, not knowing what's right, not believing what's true, not following God's light. That's what divides us, not believing that he's the higher authority. So we're all left to kind of interpret truth on our own.
Yep.
And so that creates this state of confusion. And the Bible actually, in the book of Revelation, toward the end, makes this call. It says, come out of Babylon, come out of confusion, come out to truth, come out to light, leave the division of politics and crime and immorality and leave that behind and come to truth. And we've mentioned this passage before on the podcast, but John chapter 12, he says, Jesus says, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all people to myself.
Yeah.
And right before that, he says, now something's going to happen that's going to show that the whole world is judged and condemned. So something's about to happen. And then he says, if I be lifted up. So he's talking about the cross.
The crucifixion. That's
right, the crucifixion. So what he's saying is the truth that we see in Jesus on the cross is going to show a stark contrast to the selfishness and division of the world. And we have to make a choice which one we want. Do we want the selfishness and division, or do we want what we see pictured in the life and death of Jesus?
Wow. Well, listen, that's a lot. You know, that was a very short question with a very deep answer that you've given. If you have been listening along, let me tell you what I'm getting out of it. You know, and this is Kevin. If you're listening. Division comes because we have different people we're looking to for leaders, for leadership.
And
right?
ourselves sometimes.
And ourselves, our own. So we're looking at ourselves. We need to be united with the same leader, with the same version of truth. I mean, I think that's some things we talk a lot about in church is that there are so many people that believe they have quote unquote the truth, but that's why we have so much division, right? But on the flip side of it, you made me think a little bit. I mean, that sometimes we wonder, why can't we all get along? Maybe we should be thankful that we don't all get along, because the mob mentality isn't always good. You can go along with the crowd and end up in a bad place. And at the end of it all, it's human selfishness is what I'm hearing from you.
And so we need a miracle. We need to see Jesus and see what a miracle he is and look at him and go, that's what life is all about right there.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Life, selflessness, love, giving, service, setting our own selfish motives aside for the good of everybody else. What if everybody operated on those things?
Yeah.
And here's the point of it too. And we even see this in the Bible. There's a lot of people that say, yes, I want to live that way, but in our own strength, we can't do it. It's impossible because we have this sickness in us that's called sin. Everybody does. We're all equal in that. And so we need this miracle from Jesus, the one who was selfless and giving and put himself first, or put us first, put himself second, is he promises to come into our life and transform our heart, to take us from selfish to selfless, so that pride and disobedience and those things won't be the motivating force behind what we do, but him and his kingdom and his goodness and love, that will be how we live our lives.
I find it interesting, especially during this political season, that people are saying they are the solution. They are going to be the uniter and bring people together. But maybe as we kind of finish this up, of course, you're going to get the last word. But if you're listening, that I don't think that you can answer the question of getting along without including Jesus in the answer somehow. Right?
That's right.
And so that's the only way we're ever going to be truly united. But until then, maybe division isn't so bad. I don't know. You're causing me to think a little bit on that whole subject.
Differences of opinion are good. Thinking for ourselves is good. But division, like Kevin's talking about, where we just can't come together as a human family, that's a problem. And what God wants us to do is actually come together to seek him. Come together to seek truth. Not come together to be self-seeking, Because if that's the case, we will never actually come together.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So if we come together to seek God, which is what we're trying to do with Try Jesus, you're all invited. Come along, get
That's
on
right.
board, come to our events, subscribe to the podcast.
That's right.
This is what we're trying to do here in our city.
Yeah.
Is come together to seek Jesus with all of our hearts.
Well, you talk about that. We want to encourage you, go to the website, tryjesusauburn.com, to find out about the meetups, the things that are happening right now. I think it's good that we don't mention them here because people are going to be listening to this thing,
Yeah.
Forever.
Right.
But go to the website, tryjesusauburn.com. And if you have a question for Pastor Dustin Hall, tryjesusauburn.com. There you can go and ask your questions, and we will. I will be presenting them here, especially the really hard ones for him to answer, because that's his job. That's what he's here for. I'm just here to take the credit when he sounds really good. So, anything else you want to say to Kevin or to our family before we go?
We covered it. Thanks for the questions. Keep them coming.
All right. God bless you. We'll see you next time.